Hello and welcome to everyone who's tuning in today. I'm Vera with the Berkeley Judicial Institute, back with another Judges in the Community interview, joined today by Judge David Keenan of King County, sharing his journey engaging on an active and meaningful level with local law school students in his community. Good morning, Judge. I just
Good
want
morning.
to thank you so much for being here and lending your wisdom to this project. And then beyond that, just ask you to briefly share more about who you are, where you sit, and some further details about yourself or your judicial history.
Sure. I'm a Superior Court judge, so a state general jurisdiction trial court judge in the state of Washington, and I'm in King County. King County is the largest county in the state, population of about 2 million. We have 54 Superior Court judges here in my jurisdiction, and I'm going on 7 years on the bench.
Wow. Well, it's so nice to meet you, and thank you so much for that.
Nice.
Knowing that, I think it's just time to dive right in.
Okay.
Clearly, I'm sure you've experienced a lot, created so many things in your career, but which project brings you here today to highlight and share with the judicial world?
Sure. Thanks, Vera. So I've been giving these talks, and when I say I am often speaking with my colleague, Court Commissioner Jonathan Lack, on what we're calling institutional racism and truth and reconciliation in the courts. And, I got started in that after George Floyd's murder in 2020. Mm-hmm. And it's not as if I hadn't thought about anti-racism and the courts before that. It's just that after George Floyd's murder, our state Supreme Court here in Washington did something pretty extraordinary. And when I say extraordinary, no other court in the nation had done it at that point that I was aware of, although I think some did since. And they issued a letter to the community. And one thing that they said in that letter was, as judges, we must acknowledge the role that we have played in devaluing Black lives. And I thought that was so powerful, Vera, because it was not one of these non-apology apologies. It wasn't a we're sorry if or we regret certain things. It was we acknowledge we have devalued Black lives as judges. And that allowed other courts really in our state to follow suit. And so the court that I work in, King County Superior Court, our presiding judge at the time, Jim Rogers, issued a letter on behalf of the court acknowledging our role in harm in the Black community, for example, in upholding racist deed restrictions, so redlining in decades past. And, it just got me to thinking about the history that all judges and lawyers and law students have to grapple with when they join our profession or when they join the court. And I occupy a seat here in this courthouse that I work in, where I am right now. It's over 100 years old. And there have been terrible racist decisions that have come from judges of this court in decades past. And as a judge here now, I can't just say, well, that was them. I'm not that. I feel like as a judge, I have to grapple with that history and work to educate people on it and work to undo it. And so that's really how I started doing the work. And if you'd like, I'm happy to tell you a little bit about why it matters to me and what we do.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so curious in how it's impacted you, how it's impacted the students, and also just what one of the talks looks like. How does it work when you walk in the room, setting it up, and how does it really unfold?
Yeah. So, I mean, I explained a little bit about why it matters to me, and part of it is trying to deal with that history in our legal profession. But also, I have lived experience and I have privilege. I come from a family where I and both of my parents had been charged here in the criminal legal system where I work now in the court. My mother and I as juveniles, and my father as an adult. And I was expelled from high school and earned a GED, and eventually, made my way to the law through a long path that I won't get into today. But I also know that path and my experience in the criminal legal system and that of my parents and my experience in the school disciplinary system would have been a lot different and a lot more severe and a lot more consequential in a negative way for me if I'd have been Black, if I'd have been Latinx, if I'd have been gay, if I would have lived with a disability, if I would have been a woman. And so that's part of what propels the work that I do now, and why I've found this to be so important to me. So I've given this talk to judges. In fact, I gave a similar talk through the Berkeley Judicial Institute a few years back. But what I've been doing every year now for the past 3 years is giving this talk at the two Seattle law schools. There are 3 law schools in Washington. One is Gonzaga, but that's in the eastern part of the state. I'm in Seattle. So University of Washington School of Law, and then Seattle University School of Law. Seattle University is where I attended law school. And these schools have orientations. So, this just happened last month, in fact. So went to the University of Washington, all of their incoming 1L. So every first year student and all of their new graduate students, I spend the morning 1 hour with each of them talking about this topic. And what I titled the presentation this year was The Promise and the Peril of a Legal Education. And so I walk in, and you can imagine, I don't know what the incoming 1L class is at the University of Washington, but I mean, it was quite a bit. There were probably at least 150 or so law students. And I spend a good hour, Vera, with them, telling them about racist, biased, bigoted court decisions that have been written by judges who graduated from their law school.
Wow.
So it's I think, and it's a bit sobering. And I remember I was putting the presentation together, and I thought, maybe this is a bit harsh, but I end on a hopeful note. But what we talk about is how much harm you can do with a legal education. And what I'm trying to impress upon these new students, right? They've been in law school for just a few days at that point, is there are so many wonderful things that you can do with a Juris Doctor and with a license to practice law. And hopefully you're all here to do many of those wonderful things, but you can also do a lot of harm. And also you have a role now in learning about the harm that was done in the past and using your education now to undo that harm. And so we talk about a decision from the Washington Supreme Court involving an alumnus of the University of Washington School of Law, for example. The justice there wrote a decision, wrote a concurrence raging against the Black community. And this was a decision where the Washington Supreme Court upheld the right of a cemetery to deny grieving Black parents the right to bury their child in the cemetery because it was a whites-only portion of cemetery. Wow. And then we talk about a decision where our state Supreme Court upheld the right of a prosecutor in a sodomy conviction to argue to the jury that a gay person is perverted and does not think like we do. And a Supreme Court decision here in Washington where the Supreme Court referred to a person with an intellectual disability in really horrific terms that I will not repeat here. And a decision of the Washington Supreme Court in the Yamashita case more than 100 years ago, where the state Supreme Court upheld the right of the licensing agencies here in Washington to deny a Japanese American person the right to sit for the bar on account of his race, and using really horrific, terrible language about race being founded on the characteristics of skull and things like that. And, I mean, I could go on, but those are just some examples. And, what I'm trying to impart to these students is this is the profession you're joining. And I want you to understand that it may be history, but it's your history. And those cases are still out there.
Right.
And then we end on a hopeful note. We end on a hopeful note talking about all of the wonderful things many of their alumni, both at University of Washington School of Law and Seattle University School of Law, are doing in the community with our statewide racial justice consortium, with our task force on race in the criminal justice system 2.0, which involves all 3 Washington law schools. And so we just talk about some of the great work that their fellow alumni are doing and the great work that they could do. And what I end with is a photo of a law degree, right? One from the University of Washington, and then of course at Seattle University, one from Seattle University. And I just asked them, are you going to use this to perpetuate harm, or are you going to use this for good? Because it's such a powerful tool. And so I really want them to understand the history of our system, how it shapes our presence, and then the opportunities that they have for change.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like such an important perspective and such relevant context. I can't imagine what they feel when they walk out of that room. And I wonder, how have they been impacted? Have you had any conversations with them, any
I get a
experiences?
lot of follow-up. Each year, I get follow-up questions from law students. In fact, I just met with one of them yesterday from the University of Washington School of Law, and they'll email me and they'll say, this was impactful, or they'll say, Judge Keenan, after your presentation, I have so many questions. I didn't think about these things. And of course, I wouldn't expect any of these law students, and many of them, of course, are not even from the state of Washington. I wouldn't expect them to come here and be steeped in what the decisions are of the Washington Supreme Court from 75 or 100 years ago. And so it's a bit of an eye-opener for them. And they follow up, and what each one of them wants to know each time is, what I do. What can I as a law student do to educate myself better? And we have great conversations. And I go in there as a bit of a teacher, but I turn into a student because the students teach me as well, right? I mean, I'm a white cisgender male. And so I'm on this journey trying to learn, and really I would say that a tip I would give for anyone who's considering doing something like this for other judges or lawyers is, as I'm putting these things together, because the first year they asked me to do it, my response was, thank you, but, do you think, and I didn't want to condescend to them because of course they had thought about this, but I wanted to talk about this. What does it mean for a white cisgender man to come and talk with law students about racism?
Mm-hmm.
And where I landed was, I had a talk with a Black judicial colleague of mine right after George Floyd's murder. And their response was, you white judges need to do some heavy lifting here and figure this out. You can't look to the judges of color and lawyers of color and law students of color to do all of this work. And so we had a good talk, but I would say, particularly if you are not a person of color, if you are not from a marginalized community, if you're going to give talks like this, make sure that you're not centering yourself. And so I really take pains to try to not make this about me and my background. Build support, I'd say, and listen so that you can learn how to be an ally, which is something I think I'm still learning how to do, and to share space without taking up space, right? To be, for example, a white ally in the room who is not dominating the room and making it all about you and your experiences and your feelings.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That's actually something I would love to know more about. Just what it usually takes for you to prepare, and how judges interested in following in your footsteps should go about setting up something like this and engaging with the community in this way.
Well, one very concrete thing I would say judges can do, which is, this started for me when I started reading about redlining cases, so cases where courts upheld racist deed restrictions, for example. And when I read about the Price case, which was the cemetery case, and it just got me to thinking, there must be other examples here in Washington of racism and bigotry beyond the cases where there were racist decisions involving Black individuals, Black members of our community. And so I just jumped into Westlaw and I started searching. And frankly, I was searching on racially offensive, insensitive terms and bigoted terms in Washington to see what would come up. And I wasn't surprised. Certainly, I'm disappointed, but I wasn't surprised when I would find Washington Supreme Court decisions referring to Asian Americans in racist terms. And so those are cases I talk about, or referring to individuals who are members of our LGBTQ plus community in awful, really horrific terms, and individuals living with disabilities as another example. And so judges in any state can easily undertake that exercise from their desk, right? They go into Westlaw and search for appellate decisions in their state involving bigoted terminology. And I identified a whole universe of cases like that. So much so that one of my next projects is seeing what we can do, if anything, about the sodomy decisions, which I find very troubling. Because I would say our state Supreme Court did something that any other state Supreme Court, I think, could do as well, which is very concrete, which is that it has worked where it can to explicitly disavow those decisions, because they're not good law, but occasionally you'll see these cases cited for other points. And so the Price case, the cemetery case, our state Supreme Court in a case called Garfield County a couple of years ago, went out of its way to overturn and disavow that authority. There was another case involving Native American fishing here in the Pacific Northwest, where the state Supreme Court made the effort to explicitly overturn and disavow that case. So those are concrete things that I think judges in any jurisdiction can do. I would say connect with your law schools and ask them, what are you teaching your first year law students? What are you telling them during orientation? Right? Other than telling them how to log into the Wi-Fi and giving them some tips on testing, like issue rule analysis conclusion, and telling them where they can buy their books. What are you telling them? What are law schools in your jurisdiction telling their law students about bias? And so I think those are some of the questions, some of the things that any judge in any jurisdiction can do. And when I say that, I don't mean to imply that other judges aren't already doing that. I mean, I've talked with judges all over the country that are doing wonderful things. So there's just an example of something that I am doing along often with my colleague, Commissioner Jonathan Lack. And then we have a lot of great judges and lawyers and law faculty and law students here in Washington doing wonderful things in all of these spaces.
Trust me, it's no small thing. I think changing the system has to start really at orientation. I think you're absolutely right. You can't really make progress if it's not at the root. So I think it's incredible.
Yeah, so I hope these law students, because some of them still reach out to me, I hope that they'll keep coming back to me because again, I learn as much from them as they learn from me.
Were there any last moments or inspirational things you experienced that you want to share just from your experience with the project?
I can't think of anything other than, it just helps me to, I think, be a more thoughtful, more reflective judge, because it's not just important for law students and lawyers to learn this history. It's really important for judges to learn this history and to understand, in our court and probably in many or most courts, each judge occupies a position where we have predecessors, right? I'm in position number 26. It was the 26th position, presumably, that was created in our court. We have 54 positions now. And so I think about the judges that came before me in this position, the judges that came after me, right? And what is our legacy? What is our responsibility to the judges who came before us and those who come after us? And part of that is learning our history. And again, how it shapes our presence and what opportunities it presents for change.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I hope that the efforts you've made can spread far and wide across the country. And I think many judges, I can imagine, would want to carry this out themselves.
I hope so. And I think many judges are. Again, I don't want to suggest that I'm the only judge doing this. And so, Vera, I really appreciate our time today. And I'm a big fan, again, of the Berkeley Judicial Institute, of Denise and the Judge Vogel and everybody that's there. So happy to help anytime.
We're big fans too.
Great.
That's for sure. Well, thank you and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, Vera. Bye-bye.